player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today's the Bronwell character review, a much delayed new dark unit added to the game. And today's character review is going to be pretty standard stuff. It's going to be the character overview, where talk about them at a high level, the base and total stat analysis, and a whole bunch of other metrics leading up to the report card, where we examine them a little more closely in the context of the rest of their kit, the rest of the characters in the game. We'll go through the general thoughts, where I can highlight some specific talking points that I want to go over. We'll look at the passives, the counters, the job abilities, auto priority, things that make up the character, the TMR review, some job-based vision card eligibility, which is obviously becoming more important than ever, some general optimization, and then 2 sample builds with some Truststone recommendations. So, without further ado, brand new dark unit here added to Global this week. They gave her the unique main job of Great Knight with the Paladin and Dragoon sub-jobs. Now, she is another great sword equipment user, similar to Astrius that we just got recently. She also equips heavier types of equipment with the Armor, Helm, and Accessory, also kind of unique there from that regard. She has a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 70 cost unit, and the faith stat recommendation is 50 faith for me. She does have some status elements you might be able to leverage, but I don't know if it's worth the extra faith for the damage she'll take, but I still want to play around with that. We'll talk about that more soon. Now, her max range is only 4 squares away, so she's definitely a much shorter range character overall, with only 1 AoE on the main job, and it's a cross shape, not a diamond shape, with 3 single target abilities, but one of them is a select 2, important to keep in mind. From a resistance standpoint, weapon type resistance is 15% to slash and strike are her 2 biggest upside niches. She's 0% to magic, the positive 5% to missile, and the minus 5% to pierce. So no real glaring weaknesses starting off. The lack of magic resistance certainly kind of raises an eyebrow given the meta we're in, but not all is lost. And then from an ailment perspective, 50% to berserk, 50% to immobilize, and 10% to sleep. That little extra sleep chance obviously can go a long way right now with the Helen of the Black Rose meta we're in, but the rest of these I'm not terribly concerned about. Now, for the mastery ability, they gave her a permanent 15 defense pen. It is a strength of hers, is the defense penetration. They also gave her a decreased AP consumption of 10%, which does have other ways to stack up with other kinds of equipment. We'll see that soon. But for the dream ability, they give her reaction block rate 50 and then defensive 15 as well. And the defense might raise an eyebrow here given kind of we've moved past that metric, but one of her biggest upsides is decreasing enemy defense pen. We'll see that more soon. Now, for the base stat analysis overall, she does come in way above the 75th percentile, but she's not irregular. She's definitely amongst the post 3rd anniversary units overall. 3986 for base HP is definitely on the higher side of the spectrum. Absolutely a great starting spot here. From a base attack, also in that bucket of where we see most units come out, and she's at 421, also well above that 75th percentile of all units in the game. This is a very, very healthy stat for her, for sure. From a base agility, this is where you first see the big weakness that I think will linger in the rest of her kit. Her base agility is 53, and although base agility really doesn't mean a whole lot in the broad scheme of things, 53 is as low as you can possibly go here on my spectrum of the grouping, and if you compare it to everybody, yeah, this is going to rear its head later on when we talk about total agility with all the extra percentages adding up. Now for base dexterity, also a big weakness here, among one of the worst in the game here. Base dexterity is at 175, so really need to put in a lot of work to make that critical hit rate worth a damn. And then the base luck, she's relatively average here, maybe just a smidge on the higher of what you see for, you know, distribution of characters. 178 is not a bad spot though, but not really a strength at all. Now for the total stat analysis, when we kind of transform those base stat charts into more of a comparative look here, you know, pretty standard stuff from what we saw. The attack stat looks good. The luck stat, I know, may not seem all that great, but just speaking from an average perspective, she is still a strong base luck when you add in the rest of the stats. And obviously the dexterity does, even the attack stat does start to fall behind. That she doesn't really stand out from any kind of total stats here. And they do maintain a lot of that luck with 77 stats on the board. That's definitely a little bit above average, but the rest of these, I don't really know if there's a whole lot to really pick apart. Now for the agility perspective, this is again circling back on what I think is one of her biggest weaknesses. She comes in at 75 agility with no passives to amplify it. So when you put her on the spectrum of all units with these 15% and 8% made and sub-vision cards, she's not on the faster side of things. And when you compare her to characters with passives, she is definitely a tier below. That being said, her weapon gives her 8% agility, which is technically 4 extra agility points. So it does bump her up a little bit to that 79 mark, but 79 is like just average still. I'm really not all that hyped about that extra agility from the weapon. But that's okay, we'll see more soon. The crit hit and crit avoid, again, her crit hit rate is not something to really focus on. You might throw a little bit at it just for shits and giggles, but overall not a great crit hit rate unit. And crit avoid is okay. That luck stat does end up being relatively average for crit avoidance, but not necessarily a strong spot, but she does have a buff to increase her crit evasion. So this does actually end up helping her, all things considered, in the net effect. Now for the accuracy, not an accurate unit either here. Now, although they had, a pretty decent luck stat overall, the dexterity stat is not all that great. It's really bad. They obviously don't have any passives here either to increase their accuracy or any kind of buffs to do so either. There's no guaranteed hit in the kit. So all things considered, accuracy is below average here. It's definitely a weakness as well. And the evasion stat, kind of the same thing here. Although there's some evasion to play with, it's not something that ends up yielding any kind of reliable evasion percentage. So also not something I would really lean into for her, which brings us now to the report card. Now for effective HP, I'm going with an A here. She is right there in like top 10 of effective HP units, where as we saw with her resistances, really no glaring negative weaknesses. She got 21 defense innately. You can get 12 more defense on a passive. No spirit. You can also get 15 AoE res on a passive, and she has no unit res at all though. So her effective HP is really being driven by the fact that her base HP and the total HP is pretty high. The survivability, though, which is kind of like the next step of looking at this, I'm going to go with a C+ here, where I think it's just barely above average. She does have a 50% physical barrier. She also has a easy -30 defense pen to enemies, which is part of that survivability and leaning into that matchup of decreasing their defense pen, increasing her own defense, and that allows for the survivability, but obviously that's kind of a unique matchup. Now, she does have 20% pierce res. That is kind of niche, though, obviously, as a type. 25% crit evade and regen. That's really the big part of the survivability, but there's no courage, there's no re-raise. And I am going to ninja edit this though and round up to B- because I did forget she does have a 50% damage absorption on her select 2 ability. There's only 3 usages of it, but that is noteworthy that she can replenish health on her own on her main priority ability. But again, I don't really know if that's a whole out of the ordinary for what most characters get post their anniversary. Now for damage, I'm going with an A here. She has definitely good enough defense penetration. That is not a problem. The slash res pen is kind of mid because it's really only locked to her ability. We'll see when we go through the kit. She does have protect, dispel, and barrier break though, so that's why I am kind of giving her the benefit of the doubt. Her attack stat can get relatively high. When you put her in a dark team, her slash res pen can get very high. So I think net effect, people will see good damage results from her overall. The agility, I'm going with a D+ here though. I mean, base agility with those vision cards, it's 75 versus the 78 average. With passives equipped, she falls even further behind at that 75 versus an 81 average unit in the game. That includes all the worst characters, all the best characters. That 4 agility from the weapon is not enough to salvage that, in my opinion. I do think this is a big weakness. The accuracy is a D as well. Definitely below average accuracy, no guaranteed hit. The evasion, I'm going with a D+ here. Not balanced for evade potential, in my opinion. The movement is a B+, though. She does have a jump +1 passive. That's good. And she does have a buff of move 1, jump 1 on her Dragoon sub-job, which you actually might be able to use, so I do like the movement potential for her. Now, the auto ease of use, I'm going with a C+ here. There's a relatively easy buff rotation, kind of. She's got 2 teammate buffs on the main job, though, so I think people could struggle with some of the toggles, what you put on and off. I do think gearing her might be one of the hardest things, too, where you have to consider, like, do you make her too brawly? Do you make her too offensive-oriented? It's kind of like happy medium, which I think people could just struggle with conceptually. The game disruption, I'm also going with a C- here. Now here's the thing, Dark already has some really good low cost options, so the 70 cost doesn't really help her in that regard. We're also way past any kind of physical meta at the moment where decreasing enemy defense pen doesn't really help a whole lot for many of the teams that we see. So I don't think her coming into the game is really going to upend any of the teams that we're seeing. Even from a mono dark perspective, I don't think she has a good argument why she would fit into there. Now passives, I'm going with a B- here. She's got a great main passive. The rest are okay, but nothing special. The counter ability, I'm going with a C here. They're hugely average for counter abilities. The overall job and kit, I'm going with a B- here. She's more of like a supportive attacker to help a main DPS, not really a main DPS herself, and I'm going to circle back on that soon. But the final grade, and I know I've been disproportionately hard on some of these 70 cost units. In hindsight, I think I've missed on a couple. I think I underrated Shells. I think I underrated Halloween Lucio. Again, I also did think there'd be Mono Earth as much as there was going to be. But I think I got Winter Raft relatively right. I think I was right on Gerd's back. I think I was right on Sweetheart Miranda. And so I'm trying not to let that skew my perspective here, but I'm going with a C+ here. She's kind of a one-trick value unit on what she brings to the fight. We're going to talk about this more in depth right now, though. And so my general thoughts, more of a support for main DPS. This is my rationale for that thinking. The slash res pen is below average. She's got none innately. She can get 40 on her select to attack. That's it. So unless you're using her in a dark team with the Anima Vision card, Her Slasher's pen is way below average. She's limited to only one small cross-shaped AoE. There's no diamond, there's no multiple variation, it's a lot of unit-oriented stuff. She does have two ways to Dispel Protect, though, which obviously does help herself, but to me, really helps units that don't have it innately. And her cross AoE is a physical barrier break, so that same concept, even though that does technically help her own damage, I think it's more to enable other characters that can't break that barrier on their own. She's also got a 2-hit 30% Dark Imperil on her main sub-job, so to me, I think she does a lot of things that like enable other potential stronger damage dealers on her team, because I don't think she actually ends up doing it, all things considered. It's not bad. I gave her an A for the damage output, but I don't think she's that kind of character that you can put her as the main DPS and like a tank and a support and Bronwell just carries you. I just don't think that's going to be likely in most scenarios. Now, she is a very cool 70 cost Brawl unit, though. She can get to very high effective HP. The survivability, like I said, isn't great. You're really just relying on that EHP to carry you. Only the 50% barrier, which can get broken, but also we're seeing barriers have seen a resurgence, so that one's kind of hit or miss. There's no courage or re-raise in her kit, or on that note, any way to remove either of them. She does have the 50% heal back on her main ability, though, of absorbing damage, so that's definitely nice for the Brawl perspective. She also has the 10% regen, which you're seeing with Asterisk does kind of like add up over time. That's certainly nice too. And the defense pen reduction is a big part of it, where if you skew very high on her defense stat and you reduce enemy defense pen, that's net effect a whole lot less damage she's taking over time. So again, very matchup specific, but it is very potent, particularly with the limit break, which can get her up to 70. We'll talk about that soon. I think the big downside, though, is that her Select 2 ability, which is by far her best ability, only has 3 casts. I think it's very bad, because once that's gone, I think she's kind of poop. The interesting thing, though, is that there's no self-buff on the main job. You don't normally see this. You usually see a teammate buff and one self-buff. She's got 2 teammate buffs. It's actually kind of odd, but I do think that's a good thing for some optionality in her sub-job buffs or TMR options. So I don't actually think that's a huge demerit for her. She can hit to minus 70 defense pen on her limit break. That's the biggest specialization. And I do think, though, we'll see in the sample builds, she is disproportionately better in a dark attack team. The Anima Vision card for the Slasher's pen, the Sephiroth synergy where she can remove Protect for him, where he doesn't have to rely on the Soldier sub-job. He has the anti-evade with the guaranteed hits to make up for her lack of accuracy. He's actually not that bad against pierce damage, where he's got a positive innate pierce. She can give him more of that. So I think there's some interesting crossover there, obviously, with what they bring for each other. We'll see that later in the presentation, though. I do think the Dragoon sub-job is the best for her buffs, but I like her main sub-job for the extra damaging abilities. It's a real dilemma, in my opinion. We'll see that soon. The Greatsword teams, too, outside of Dark, are very lackluster at this time of the review. She fits great into that class, conceptually, as a Greatsword Brawl unit, but it's a very one-dimensional, one-trick, unbalanced group, so I don't think she really brings anything to them that they don't really already have. Now, we look at the passive abilities. The Grey Knight Inquisition is by far the best one here. That's the attack 24%, the 40 defense pen, the 15 AoE res. The rest of these definitely match up and map specific, where, sure, Holy Knight's protection, you can stack up on that defense. The Dragoon lore, the healing power, will help her absorption attack, so I technically think I like Dragoon lore best here for that second, but I love the jump +1, where if you're putting her in a team with Wrath, the two of them can jump together depending on the map you're on. It's kind of nice that Bronwell can kind of support her from the side, so I don't think there's a strong, clear second favorite here. Now for the counter abilities, again, I thought these are very, very average, but her strongest ones here are the 20% to either reduce damage taken, or you also have the Dragon's Blade, which we've seen with Young Eld. It's okay. It can be an X factor. It's just not all that overpowering. Now for the main job buffs, the boons of a higher cause, that's the 50% barrier. It's the Pierce Res, the crit evasion, the regen, and on hit, 30 defense pen reduction to enemies. So anytime she hits them, they get that reduction for 3 turns. She's also got the other teammate buff, which is a Dispel AP Restore, which I think is very niche. I don't like it. I'd probably have this off. So she's really got this one buff on the main job. We'll see about the sub-jobs in a second. For the main job here, you have, again, as I mentioned, 3 unit scaling ones, 1 AoE. Technically, one of these is a strike-oriented attack, and the range of these is very limited, with the max range of 4 squares away. Also, with these top 2, a little more limited, that they're like direct. You have to be lined up with the enemy. The Righteous Reaver is by far the best ability here, where it's a Select 2, it's a Dispel, Protect, and Shell. I didn't even mention that yet, but that's obviously very strong as part of that like supportive damage dealer that I was just mentioning. It's a Slasher's Pen of 40 for that cast, and absorbs 50% of the damage. By far the best one, but once you run out of this, boy, do I hate the rest of these abilities by and large. I don't think they get nearly the upside as most jobs do. But for the limit break here, this is a good limit break. It's 5 squares away, so at least kind of like gets an early first hit into that fight. It's an increase of defense pen of 40 for herself, so she'll easily hit 100 potentially. And it's the decrease of both defense pen and spear pen for those characters in the cross-shaped AoE. So great debuff there for reducing enemy damage. The Exorcist Vision card is an honorable mention for PvE content. The Wish on the Winter Night, kind of a niche vision card here as well. But I do like mentioning this for the magic barrier here, which she doesn't have. It also further is the decreased AP consumption, which is part of her kit. So I do see scenarios where you might equip this, because you do also have a buff to like freely use, because you only have that one teammate buff that I'm recommending so far. Now for the sub job, this is where I like this sub job the best, because I like these abilities more than the other abilities on the main job that, you know, should enemies not have a physical barrier, then the barrier break is useless. The attack debuff is kind of okay, but it's also kind of niche. The strike one is fair, but kind of redundant. But the ground pound dark is obviously nice for the 30% dark imperil. It's also a double hit, but the silencing sweep is a very interesting one here, where the thing that's nice about this is that because it's a lower AP cost, should the enemy not have physical barriers on them, if you notice, Great Slash here is the same modifier, it's the same range, height, shape, all of the included, but it's 26 AP, which means if you're going against a team of enemies that do not have physical barriers, she'll use Silencing Sweep instead, which I think is obviously very interesting for that matchup currently of the Magic meta. So I don't think she's completely useless in a Magic meta. I think this is a very interesting angle to take. I just don't know how reliable it is. But absolutely an honorable mention here. The Dark Resin Peril is kind of redundant with Wrath, so I don't love that angle as much, but I like these attacks more than most of the attacks in the main job, if I can help it. Now for the Paladin, I don't really think there's a lot here to ever use for her, like maybe Sentinel, I guess. I just started using that with Astrius. It works okay occasionally. I don't really like anything here though. Maybe the Taunting Blade for like a pseudo tank angle, where she does kind of have that high effective HP and brawl potential that, yeah, in a physical damaging team, she probably could use Taunting Blade and do pretty well against physical enemies, where this is technically the farthest range as well, so she'll use it early in the fight. I actually don't hate that angle for her. If you were to take Raph out of the equation, use her instead, try to use a different team synergy, I'm giving that one an endorsement, a thumbs up. Now for the Dragoon sub job, this is where I like the buffs the best. Dragonskin obviously gives her the Protect, it's the attack buff, it's the much needed crit rate buff, the react block of 100, which she's already got a 50, so that's kind of unnecessary, but this is still a good buff overall. But I like the Dragon Standard as well here, the move one, jump one. I think it's a very valuable buff here as well. So I don't love the attacks here, but I love the buffs here, so you really got to pick and choose what sub job do you want to run. Now for the TMR review, I think this is a very strong TMR. I love the 15 luck on this. It's another great haste TMR. It's 25% decreased CP consumption. I do think this is a very, very valuable TMR that, although it's missing the agility that you might get on a couple of them, I do think the luck is a good trade-off for many other kinds of units. I think this is a top tier potential TMR. Definitely a big thumbs up for that reason. Now for the job-based vision cards. You know, we saw this with Asus last week. There's a lot of agility-oriented ones, which I think is kind of replaceable. You can get that with a couple of the vision cards, and to me, that's usually one of the easier ones to drop. It's the lack of a unit res card that I think makes this class very difficult to group at the moment. There's a couple decent enough AoE ones. The A2 vision card is coming out soon, and there are some decent enough overlaps, let's say like Staff Devout or Staff Black Mage, but I think you're missing out on a couple other really important ones, namely the Sword Red Mage, the Glove Cast, the Mace cards. The overlap there is not all that great. Spear has none. So I think compared to where other good classes are for the overlaps, this class still kind of misses. So individually, some decent vision cards. And we'll just highlight JB's infographic here for a moment too. These cards individually really aren't all that bad. There's some decent ones here. Oh, there we go. There's some decent ones here for what you want to get for agility, for resistances, for crit evade, for elemental chain res. There's a slash res pen here, at least on one of them. You have a couple different AoE options, some slash attack oriented ones, which obviously are very necessary sometimes, but maybe less so. That's obviously a very matchup specific call, but I don't love the vision card, so I'm kind of tempering expectations on that. Now the general optimization, the Ecclesia Greatsword for her is the decreased AP consumption, it's defense pen 20, it's 8% agility. There's a couple good things on that. I kind of like the Save the Queen though, as the damage reduction better. The Glacial Crown for the 30% slash res pen is also very important, where she has none innately. I don't know if I have a favorite yet. I really have to play with all three of these, but they're all very, very viable builds. For the other equips, I think these are pretty standard for what you would take for other kind of heavy armor. The Alex ring certainly is nice for the crit rate and the accuracy. For the Espers, I think pretty standard stuff here, other than the matchup specific things, where maybe you go Demon Wall for dark and light res, maybe you go something for earth res or wind res. But in terms of just offensively speaking, I think these Espers are totally fine. And the TMRs, pretty standard recommendations here. Go for maybe some of the ones that have agility or haste. Go for some of the armors that have some versatility with the Keen Blade, let's say, but nothing too special otherwise. Now for the sample builds, I went for the mono dark one here first with Raph and Sephiroth. Obviously some of these cards in the sub slots you can flex a little bit. The equipment pieces, I would save the Kreen and Maximilian armor. There's a little bit of overlap there, but I do think net effect, they both end up working really well. I gave her the jump +1 passive here, again, to kind of like jump with Raph, depending on the topography of the map you're seeing. But the Truststones, I'm going Spirit Set here, just to kind of offset the already strong defense profile that she has. And I'm going with the, sorry, typo, it's the agility set here. And when you look at all the stats of things considered, over 11,000 HP, just barely here. Pretty strong for that total number. 49 defense, 30 spirit, 1,500 attack here, 109 agility, which again is not the worst, but I'm really trying to pump that into her with the agility set and the Esper choice as well. She's got the jump of 2 here, again, very noteworthy. The 20 unit res, 40 AoE res. She's got some chain resistance here of 36, 30% decreased AP consumption. The big noteworthy thing here for me is the amount of modifiers that she has. She's got 83 dark attack, 87 slash attack, 45 human killer. That is definitely a fair bit amount average here. So I think that offensive output in this team is a very strong, considering you also have the 55 defense pen, the 45% slash res pen, which will be 85% on that select too. So I think she has some great offensive output potential here, in addition to the brawl profile. So I think it's a really nice balance of both. But if you make a great sword team, again, I'm really stretching to try to like theory craft this. I made this one here with Joom, where if you figure like if you're in a strong physical damage meta, Joom's limit break with that physical aura. I just do in Black Rose Helena to try to like pick outside the class. I did Shal's last time on the Staff Devout, so I went Helena here for the Staff Black Mage. The Vision card synergy is really not all that there. I really wanted to throw in the Heinler Dragon here just to kind of like show off what a build might potentially look like, but I don't feel particularly strong about this one. I mean, overall the stats are just worse. The HP is way lower, the attack is about the same, but the penetrations just kind of flip differently. It's like 75 defense pen and much lower slash res pen. It's not awful, but this team is just, I don't know if it's how many things it's beating. And so yeah, net effect, I put this team together just to like stress test some stats. But again, really end of the day, it comes down to what kind of team makes sense. And I'm still working that out for those greatsword units, Bronwell included. But finally, the Truststones here, you know, I think the HP, the spirit, the defense, time and time again have proven that they're all worthy in their own right. She does have that heal back ability, so you obviously might want to take advantage of that extra healing power. Obviously matters on what kind of what kind of TMR you have on there to maximize the stats. I think the left side is pretty standard, boilerplate for what I always recommend. The right side, I could go agility or aim. I don't think the aim is that salvageable. It's maybe kind of a Hail Mary. I think the agility is a bigger weakness that you need to hedge against. That I really find it difficult scenarios that you would not have the agility set on, just because she is so much slower than most top-end units are. In terms of passives, you know, the defense pen I don't think is a major concern, considering she has the 15 on the mastery ability. She could get 20 on a weapon or on her own weapon, which is why I say the defense pen 10 is kind of over here on the right, because it really doesn't depend on if you genuinely need it, what you might already have equipped. For right here, my normal recommendations, I do think the dark attack and the slash res pen 10 are definites in my opinion. The rest of them, the healing power 10 for sure. The react block might be overkill because she's got the 50% innately, but I just realized it's reaction block 20, not 10. Yeah, like I said, might be overkill, but honestly, we're getting to the point now where it really doesn't seem to be the case. But obviously the crit rate 10 or dexterity have competitive choices too. So I think really any combination of what you see here on the right probably still going to get you relatively same results. But that's the Bronwell character review altogether. There's a lot of things to like about here. It's honestly a pretty decent addition to the Dark cast, just considering her profile overall. I do think there's going to be a time and a place where she is going to actually shine. It may not be this current moment, but she's got enough of a specialty that when those situations arise, I have no doubt she'll probably end up being a pretty solid contributor. But that's everything I'm thinking of for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to you all soon.